All right, we got it. I don't know what I'd do. If you ever don't show up, Terry, I'm dead in the water. All right, I thought since yesterday was the 12th day of Christmas and today's the Epiphany, maybe we'd take a study today of what we know about those first early years of Jesus' life. We tend to not look at those passages of Scripture very often. We kind of know them from the stories bit by bit, but I thought we'd try and piece all that together today and sort of look at the first 3 years of his life and what we know about it. So let's just review for a moment from the time that Mary and Joseph heard that they needed to go and, as part of the census, go to Bethlehem to be counted. So she's in her 9th month, Mary is, and they're in a town that's smaller than Bethlehem. Nazareth is much smaller. Bethlehem was not big, but Nazareth was actually smaller yet. And so they need to go back to the home where the father, in this case Joseph, or her husband, where he was from, to be counted. So, it did make a bit of difference to them. You just needed to pick up, the government, you just had to pick up from wherever you were and travel back to where you're from. Now, that could be, around the corner down the street, or it could be a long ways off. Didn't matter. That's where you had to go. So, they had a trip of about 90 miles. It's about 60, 70 miles as the crow flies, but it was 90 miles for them. And it was over hills and valleys, but it also would have needed to, the trail would have winded around and past little Samaritan communities. You didn't go into Samaritan communities if you were a Jew. That was just trouble. You just didn't go to that side of town. And so the trail was actually longer than it would have to be, the trip. So it actually tallied up to be about 90 miles. Probably on a donkey for her, Joseph probably walking, and it probably took them, they're saying, in those days you could travel 15, 18 miles a day, 20 if you really pushed it. So this probably took them the better part of a week, maybe 7, 8 days, even 9, depending on how far she wanted to travel. And it meant camping out at night. And the Judean countryside got very cold in the evenings, even during that time, any time of year. The evenings, like a desert evening. The desert, even in August, can be cold at night. So they were camping along the way. They had no other way to care for themselves. And when they got to Bethlehem, being that this was the home of Joseph's ancestors, his family, he would have known people there. So, we always think of the story, there was no room. The word that you see in Greek that we translate into inn, I-N-N, like a hotel, there was no room at the inn, but they're only mentioning that because at first there must have been no room where his family was. The fact that he went back there surely meant there was family. And family would always take other family in, but it could be a lot of other families. Members of the family were also showing up in Bethlehem at the same time for the census. So it wasn't just Mary and Joseph who were coming, there were others. And so if they went to the home of their family, it sounds like it was full up, and so was the inn. So there were a lot of people in town for the census. Now, when we think about these homes may have been made of stone, or they may have been made of skins. If they were well-to-do, they would have built stone structures, but for others, it was just skins. It was walls made of animal hides that you were inside. From what we understand of the way Matthew and Luke talk about it, it sounds as if it was a stone house where they went into. And the houses were built in such a way that there was an entry way, large, that then went up a few steps to the living area, and it was all open. So you walked in, and then there were some stone stairs. You'd go up maybe 2 or 3 steps, almost like a split level, and then the upper area would have been divided into some rooms with small, sometimes low stone divisions, room to room. Rarely were the rooms completely sealed from floor to ceiling like we have rooms. Most were open, at least to some extent, from room to room. But the point of that entryway was that that's where the animals stayed when the weather was colder. And they brought the animals in there, not so much to protect the animals, but that the house would then be warmed by the heat put off by these oxen or sheep or whatever those animals were. And so just inside the door would have been an area, there would have been hay, there would have been a feeding trough. This is where the animals would be staying if the weather was cold. And it tended to put enough heat in the rest of the house that people were able to live in there. And it just helped to generally heat. And so when we think of a stable, it probably wasn't a separate building down around the corner, or like a barn, like a farm might have today, you know, outside the house and down across the way is a stable. It was part of the home itself. And so, being that there weren't any rooms where they could stay, they said, you can stay right here where the animals normally go. Now, were the animals in there? Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. But there would have been a manger, which would have been the feeding trough that they would have put the food in, and they were able to take that, fill that with straw, and put a baby in there. Probably until there was enough room for them to move up into the house after somebody else left or whatever. But in the meantime, Jesus was born in that stable area of the house. The next thing we learn is found in Luke. So I'd like you to take your Bibles, turn to Luke chapter 2. And just stop me along the way if you have questions. Happy to talk more about it. Luke 2:15. Got some water down the wrong pipe here. Somebody read Luke 2:15 to 21, if you would.
When the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let's go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about." So they hurried off and found Mary and Joseph and the baby, who was lying in the manger. When they had seen him, they spread the word concerning what had been told them about his child, and all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. But Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. The shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things they had heard and seen, which were just as they had been told. And then do 21.
Yep.
On the 8th day, when it was time to circumcise him, he was named Jesus. And the name the angel had given him before he had been conceived.
All right. Thank you. So, following Levitical law, the Torah, Jewish tradition, you circumcised on the 8th day. It was considered that a baby was ceremonially unclean for the first 7 days. And being ceremonially unclean meant you had you were unclean if you had some contact with blood. Any kind of blood, excuse me, made you ceremonially unclean. So a baby was unclean for 7 days. On the 8th day, they were to be circumcised. Circumcision was a huge event because this made that baby now part of the Jewish people. your heritage being a descendant of Abraham, and circumcision began with Abraham. God gave Abraham that practice of circumcision. It was a way that discriminated a Jew from others, males, by having circumcision. It was a way that women who were Jewish would know if the man they were about to marry or to have sex with was a Jew. That's how you knew. That's what it was important for separation. And so that's how you became part of the Jewish people. You became part of God's people by circumcision. It's kind of like baptism is for us, but it had this. It definitely had this important component of being separate. It would have been a time, if you were living at home and in your own family and neighborhood, you would have had people come over. It would have been an event. The circumcision is done by the father, so it was likely Joseph who did the circumcision. And whatever family members would have been there at the time would have joined around them and been part of the celebration. So here's this little baby being cut, probably crying their eyes out, and everybody's cheering. Everybody's happy because we've welcomed this new baby now into the Jewish people and one of God's people. There's also, it always would be the senior male family member that does it. Now, unless Joseph had an elderly relative there who could have done the circumcision, it was probably done by Joseph himself. And that's all we know. So we know Jesus was circumcised on that 8th day. The law, the Jewish law, the Torah also specified that after circumcision, they must wait another 33 days, and then the baby must be purified or dedicated. That was always to be done in the temple, and that was done by a priest. So the baby would be washed, and many prayers said, and the baby was now dedicated to God. Well, that meant you needed to get back to Jerusalem. You had 33 days now to get back, not to where they lived in Nazareth, but to Jerusalem, to the temple. It's one temple, it's in Jerusalem. Needed to get back to Jerusalem for this celebration, this purification rite that needed to happen in the temple. And so we read about that in Luke. If you continue there in Luke 2, let's read starting at 22, let's go through 27. Somebody want to read 22 to 27 of Luke 2?
I will. All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips.
Nope, can't be. That can't be right.
Faith was connected.
Luke 2:22.
My bad. When the time of their purification, according to the law of Moses, had completed, Joseph and Mary took him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male is to be consecrated to the Lord, and to offer a sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons. Now there was a man in Jerusalem called Simeon, who was righteous and devout. He was waiting for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit was upon him. It had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not die before he had seen the Lord's Christ. Moved by the Spirit, he went to temple courts. When the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him what the custom of the law required, Simeon took him in his arms and praised God.
Somebody want to pick up there, and we'll read Simeon's prayer. It starts at 29, and let's go down through 37.
I'll read it.
Okay.
So, Lord, as you have promised, you now dismiss your servant in peace.
For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all people, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for the glory to your people Israel. The child's father and mother marveled at what was said about him. Then Simeon blessed them and said to Mary his mother, "This child is destined to cause the falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your own soul too." There was also a prophetess, Anna, the daughter of Phanuel of the tribe of Asher. She was very old. I'm sorry, that just seems funny to me. She was probably 45.
What do you see?
Oh, okay. She was very old. She had lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage. And wait, she had lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage, and then was a widow until she was 84. Okay, we'll say that's old. She never left the temple, but worshipped night and day, fasting and praying. Coming up to them at that very moment, she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem. Should I keep going?
Nope, that's good. Thank
Okay.
you. So let's just review that now. They take the baby Jesus to Jerusalem and to the temple. And according to the law, they were to come and present him to the priest and then to make an offering. So there was to be a sacrifice done here on the altar. It is to make the baby part of the redeemed people. Redeemed in their sense meant the people who were released from bondage in Egypt. And you become part of that by being redeemed yourself, and you do that by having the priest make an offering to God for you. The offering that was prescribed for this was a lamb. You were to come and to bring a lamb and have it offered on the altar, but many people could not afford a lamb. They were expensive if you had to buy one, and unless you raised them yourself, it could get very costly. So there was an option provided in the law for those who couldn't afford a lamb. And you could come with either a pair of pigeons or a pair of turtle doves. So the fact that that's what they brought, we know that this was not a very wealthy or well-to-do family. They were poor, but they brought what they needed to. And they've been traveling, right? They've been traveling. They haven't been home. They probably had to go and buy those from someone, a vendor outside the temple would have had these for you, and you can buy them and take them in. So that's what the markets, the marketplace around the temple, one of the things that they would have sold. And here's this man Simeon, and Simeon has been waiting for the Messiah to come. He's been waiting for the fulfillment, finally, of the Messiah to come to the Jewish people. And it says that in 25, he's waiting for the consolation of Israel. And it was revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not see death. He wouldn't die before he had seen the Messiah. And so this man was waiting, and he was waiting, and he was waiting to finally see the Messiah. And something told him, the Spirit did, that he needed to go into the temple that day because he was going to see that child. And so it's a prophecy. And he goes in, and he came into the temple, and the parents bring the child in, and they don't know Simeon, and he doesn't know them. But he picks up this baby, and he recites what we know today as the Song of Simeon. It's in our morning prayer, on our evening prayer services. We always have near the end the Song of Simeon, and this is it. And he says, "Lord, now I can die. Now you are letting your servant depart in peace according to your word. You said I would see the Messiah. Here he is. My eyes have seen your salvation, that you have prepared in the presence of all peoples a light for revelation to the Gentiles. That had to be tremendously confusing to everybody standing there. Even those who were there, what is this really the Messiah we're holding in our arms here, who's going to, restore Israel and all the people? But he says it's going to be a light to the Gentiles and for glory to Israel, but the Gentiles. So it's a real prophecy on the part of Simeon that this Savior of the world was here not just for the Jews, but for others as well. They don't say this, but there also would have been a payment made. You would have given 5 shekels. That's required by the law for this to the priest in order to be given and taken and given this purification rite. The baby would have then been bathed in water as a purifier, and the sacrifice made on the altar, so that these doves would have been burned on the altar as the baby is being washed, and the priests are saying various prayers. So that's what the ceremony looks like. Then Simeon comes in and says all this. And then when you look at verse 33, the father and mother, Joseph and Mary, they marveled at this, at what Simeon just said. Like, what? And then he blesses them, and he tells Mary another prophecy, not necessarily one you want to hear. This child is going to be appointed for the rising and the falling of many in Israel. There are many who are going to fall. Some of those are going to be Pharisees and Sadducees and others. And others are going to rise. And a sword is going to pierce your heart or your soul, so that thoughts from many hearts may be revealed. So you, Mary, are going to experience some great pain in your life. So that's Simeon's prophecy. It's a very wonderful and glorious prophecy, but it certainly has a darker side to it as well, and that's this. And then there's this woman, Anna. Anna is actually living in the temple. There were people, especially if they were homeless, you could always go and live in the temple. They had living quarters. They had places where you could go and take a meal. If you were homeless and you were a Jew, you would find your way into the temple. They would not allow you to just live outside on the streets if you're a Jew. She's the daughter of Phanuel, tribe of Asher. So Luke is telling us this so we understand a little bit about who this woman is. It's not just some random person off the street. First of all, she's a good Jew. She is a descendant of Abraham. She's from the tribe of Asher. Maybe people knew who Phanuel was. Maybe by saying that, people recognized who her father was. They tell you that she was married for 7 years and then remained a virgin. It was permissible for a woman after her husband died to marry again, but it was considered an even greater honor to that woman if she remained a widow, if she didn't marry. And so he's saying this because he wants you to understand this is a woman of high character. Not only, does she have the right ancestry as a daughter of Abraham, but she remained a widow after her husband died, and that meant this was somebody of high repute. And she's living in the temple, and she's doing what? She's worshiping and fasting and praying day and night. So she comes over and she says what? She came up, last verse, she came up at that very hour. And again, she wasn't, part of this ceremony that was happening, but she comes in and she began to give thanks to God and to speak of him to all who were waiting for the redemption of Jerusalem. So you can sort of picture this woman telling everybody around and going out the front door and saying, you have to know who's here. He is here who is going to redeem Jerusalem. So you have two people here, unrelated, who are both affirming the fact that this is the Messiah who has come. And she probably heard what Simeon said, and she seemed to be led by the Spirit to understand the same thing. And so it's announced right there during his presentation and his purification that he was to be the Messiah. All right, notice, we haven't heard from the wise men yet, which is what we celebrate on January 6th, the coming of the Magi. So let's turn now to Luke 2, the first 12 verses. So you're going to go back a little bit. Let's read 1 through 6. Luke 2, 1 through 6. Somebody want to do that?
I'll do that.
Okay.
In the weekdays, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius
Terry, I don't think
was
that's
governor.
the right. Chapter 2, verse 1.
Yeah.
Is
That's
it?
what mine says.
Wait a minute. Maybe I have the wrong verse here. Okay. What I wanted to do was, but now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod.
I don't see that.
I'm sorry. It's not Luke. It's Matthew. My fault. We're over in Matthew now. I'm sorry. Turn back to Matthew chapter 2. Too many chapter 2s for me. At least it was a relevant story, though.
Well, at least the rest of us were at the right place.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Matthew 2, 1 to 12.
Chapter 2.
1 to 6.
Okay. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people, chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written." You want me to go more?
Yeah, 6.
Okay. "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel."
All right, let's do 7 down through 12.
Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found, make sure I'm not muted, found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route.
Okay, so when they went and they came to Bethlehem, verse 11, they went into the house. So we know that they were in the home now, not living anymore down in the stable. So get the picture. They had gone to Jerusalem. This is about 5 miles for the temple. Now they've come back to Bethlehem again. They're back at Bethlehem. They didn't go to Nazareth yet. Now whether the census wasn't finished yet or how that all happened, but they're back in the house at Bethlehem and saw the child. Verse 11, and the Greek word used here for child is not the same word that would be used for an infant. This would be more like the word used for a toddler. somebody who was, getting to be a little older, maybe walking. So this is a period of time that's gone. This is not right after the purification, which was the 40th day after he was born. This is later. And I sent out a thing back before Christmas about the stars and what the conjunction of stars meant. I'll just briefly explain that again, so we understand what it is we think the Magi were looking at.
Excuse me, Ron.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the star that we couldn't see because it was cloudy and gloomy?
That's the one, but it was there.
Yes. Okay.
People tell me it really was there.
I understood that. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
Well, that particular conjunction we just had in December was Jupiter and Saturn. And it also had a conjunction in those years before, around the birth of Christ. But it's considered more likely that what I'm going to explain to you is what the Magi saw. So the Magi were, first of all, astronomers, but they're also what we would call today astrologers. In other words, they don't just study the heavens, they believe the heavens also have messages and meaning. And that God, the gods, whoever they were, manipulated the stars and the moons and the heavenly objects in order to communicate certain things. Certain stars had certain meanings. So they both studied the astronomy, but they studied it because they felt it allowed them to understand major events or something that was about to happen in the future. Could be something catastrophic. Sometimes that's what they felt they were foreseeing. Others were great events of great joy. Other times it was the birth of kings, things of that type. So these guys watch the stars all the time, and this is what they would have seen. And they all had meaning. So first of all, there's Jupiter, and they didn't understand the difference between stars and planets necessarily, but they just knew them as heavenly objects. But they knew Jupiter looked awfully big. It was one of the brighter stars. And Jupiter had the significance of being of a king. Whenever you saw that big bright star in the sky, to them that was a sign that there was a great king or a great leader who was to be born somewhere in the world. It meant kingship. Then there was the planet Venus, which is also pretty bright because it's closer, and it meant fertility. Fertility. When you saw that, it meant your animals will be fertile. You'll have, there could be a good harvest. It could be a birth of something great, someone great. All those things around fertility. That's what Venus meant to them. And then there was a star called Regulus. And Regulus was a star, not a planet, but it's named Regulus because it comes from the Greek word for royalty. It means royal. So that star also had royal significance to them. So this is what they would have seen. They would have seen Jupiter, and then they saw Venus Regulus appear to come close together. And they almost cross, and then they separated. And 6 weeks later, they came back again, and they crossed again. And every time they would cross, it would look bright. So they came together, they went apart, they appeared to come back because of the way the orbits work. Then they go away again, and it comes back a third time, and this time Venus comes in at the same time. It's called a triple conjunction. Regulus, the star, Jupiter, the big planet, and now Venus, bright, coming in, and there was a period when all three were together, which created a very bright star in the sky, for sure. That particular conjunction, those three, has never happened again. 2,000 years later, that's never occurred. And so that would have been to the west of where they were. So they're east of Jerusalem, east of Bethlehem, and they see this brightness in the sky. When they see it, this triple conjunction, they start to go that way. they're convinced. They saw these stars come together, they went apart, they came back again, they went apart, and now all three, this has to mean something. And it's about royalty and kings and fertility. We're going to follow that. And so they go west. We're guessing that this was probably about an 6 to 8 month trip for them. And by the time they get to Jerusalem, and we have what we just read here, when they meet Herod, and Herod tells them, yeah, well, the scribes tell us that the baby is to be born, the Messiah is to be born in Bethlehem. At that point, that star would have appeared due south to them. This is 8 months after they saw the triple conjunction in the west. They follow it. By now, that's all moved. It would have been in the due south, and 5 miles south of Jerusalem where they were is Bethlehem. So when we say then they followed it and it was over Bethlehem, it's not like a star came down and sat over this town, but it led them to the south. And he said they told him it was Bethlehem. Well, there it is, and the star is to the south. This has to be right. And so that's where they go. And that's where they find him. And now he's in a house. And we don't know how many of these magi there were. We know there were 3 gifts, and so we often think there were 3 kings because there were 3 gifts. But we don't know. There could have been 20 for all we know. But the gifts that we hear about are these 3. They brought gold and incense and myrrh. Valuable things that nobody in Bethlehem would have had. This is royal stuff. This is stuff that costs real money. So they brought it in the anticipation that there would be a king. They would find a king. And the stars were telling them, there's no mistake about it. There's something kingly happening somewhere. And they went off to find it. Okay, let's continue in Matthew. We did verses 1 to 12. Let's pick up at 13 and read down through 18.
When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more.
Okay. So back on 13, when they departed, that's the Magi. When they left, then Joseph has a dream, and Joseph sees in this dream, he gets the message that we ought to not go back. Herod is going to come searching for this child. And the kings may have told them about that as well, that they had stopped and seen Herod, and Herod, wanted to come and offer his gifts and his worship. And so they tell him, he hears the message to leave, and he's to go to Egypt. Herod does. He sends his henchmen in, and they kill all the babies under 2. And given the size of the area and so on, there's an estimate that it was probably in the neighborhood of 25, 30, 35 babies under 2 that were slaughtered that day. And so that's what the Jeremiah prophecy is about in verse 18, the weeping and the loud lamentation. We celebrate that feast on December 26th every year. It's called the Feast of the Holy Innocents, the first martyrs who died for Christ, basically because of Jesus. So why Egypt? right? Egypt is going to be now to the south and to the west a bit. Why would you go to Egypt, of all places? Well, a couple reasons. Egypt in those days was a well-developed and safe country. It's very much the same reason that people leave Central America today and try to come to the United States. And if you had family there, you had a chance that you could go there and you had a safe place to stay. So Egypt was a place of safety, and a lot of refugees went there. The other thing that was important for Joseph and Mary is there was a large Jewish community living in in Egypt. When Augustus Caesar, defeated Egypt, Antony and Cleopatra, all of that, he defeated them, the Battle of Actium, this was in 31 BC. Then Egypt became part of the Roman Empire, right? The Roman Empire defeated Egypt, defeated Antony and Cleopatra, and now there was a large Jewish community that had been allowed to be there and to thrive. In fact, they'd been there for hundreds of years, sometimes in hiding. Now they were a thriving community. There would have been a place of worship there, not a temple, but a synagogue. Those people that lived there, they were Jews, but they had grown up there now over decades and decades. They were now speaking Greek, the language of the people. And so the children growing up there, they were even unfamiliar with Hebrew. And while they were there, these Jews in Egypt, they had to translate the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. That's what's called the Septuagint. It's the Greek version of the Old Testament that had always been written in Hebrew. We have that today in translations today of the Old Testament. That's the document that's used primarily because we don't have much of the Hebrew version left. So we translate the Old Testament from the Septuagint, from the Greek. That's where it was made. It was made over in Egypt in the 2nd century BC. So anyway, they go there, and it's a safe place. They may have had family there. They certainly knew there would be a strong Jewish community there to support them. So understand what happened, right? They left their home. They went to Bethlehem. They made this quick trip to Jerusalem, had a purification, came back to Bethlehem again, and now the Magi have come. They have to escape because Herod's on their tail. They escape and they go to Egypt. They stay there a while. And we'll talk a little bit about how long, but let's go to the final phase of this journey, which is when they return to Nazareth. So we're still in Matthew 2, and we're going to do verses 19 to 23. Somebody want to do that?
After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who are trying to take the child's life are dead." So he got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So it was fulfilled what was said through the prophets. He will be called a Nazarene.
So King Herod, we know, was a crazy man. He killed his family members, he killed his brothers, anybody that was a threat to him, he had them killed. And that's who they ran from. We know, historians have it clear, that Herod died in 4 BC. And once he dies, an angel tells Joseph, you can go back. Basically, Herod's gone. And so he starts back. And as he's headed back now, he also hears that Archelaus is now reigning. And Archelaus was Herod's son. He was also very anti-Jewish. And he oppressed the Jews in many ways. He also killed lots of people, not as bad as his father. And so he also has a dream. And oh, by the way, Archelaus, we know, ruled from 4 BC, when his dad died, all the way to 6 AD. Okay, so he ruled for about 9 years. And he says, don't go to Jerusalem. Don't go back there. And so he goes on to Nazareth. He goes up to where they had started. And he goes back to Nazareth. And it says, as the prophets, the words spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, that he would be called a Nazarene. That's in Isaiah 11, verse 1. It says the Messiah will be a branch. And the word branch in Greek is Nazar, N-A-Z-E-R. So he would be a branch from the descendants of David, a branch, a descendant of Abraham. That's what it means to be a Nazarene. It means to be a branch from the root of God's people, the root of Jesse. And so now they're finally back, and baby would have now been, I think most scholars would say, in the neighborhood of about 3 years old by now. And so this is what the actual timeline starts to look like. From his birth and where they traveled and how old the baby was along the way. And that accounts for the first, 3 years of Jesus' life. He spent a lot of time traveling, spent a lot of time moving away from danger, trying to avoid Herod, but finally now he's back. And the next thing we hear about him is when he is in the temple, Jesus, at the age of 12. And you'll remember he's preaching in the temple, and people, those who are there, are amazed at his ability to open up Scripture and to quote Scripture at the age of 12. So that's the next time we see him. There are some writings that are not part of the Bible, apocryphal letters and books that talk about Jesus as a child. Kind of crazy stuff, how he could make birds appear in his hand and disappear and make things float, almost like magic. There's some crazy stuff like that that's been written, but none of that is considered credible and was never added to our Bibles. So we really don't know much about what happened between this time when he got into Nazareth and when he appears in the temple. But we can imagine the kinds of things that were happening. He was learning a trade. He was working with his father Joseph, who was a carpenter. He had become, by the time he's 12, this is the age that men begin to think of marrying. And by the time he was, 13 or 14, you would expect a man like Jesus to have then started to look for a wife. But that wasn't the plan God intended for Jesus. But so he would have been learning a craft and something that he could use to have a family and to make a living. So it's our belief that Jesus learned the trade of carpentry. And that would have meant a number of things. It would have meant being able to build parts of homes. It also would have meant furniture. In many cases, it would have meant taking wood and fashioning a chair or a table. Sometimes structures to hold up skins that would have created a wall or a room separation in a house. Things like that would have all been part of the carpenter's trade. Occasionally, it would have been making kitchen utensils, a wooden bowl, a wooden cup. Sometimes wood was used for those purposes as well. So anything from rough, hard, large-scale wood structures to small implements that you might use in a home that would be made of wood. So that's as much as we know about those early years of Jesus. Let me stop there, see if there are any questions. Any thought?
I have a question.
Yeah.
When did, is it just, we did it because it fit our Christmas narrative, but when did the timeline get condensed so that most nativity sets have the wise men standing around the baby Jesus and all that stuff?
Yeah, see, when you read Luke, he goes from one to another. If you read Luke's message, he just says, and then the kings arrived these wise men arrived from the east. He doesn't say what he makes it sound as if one just happened right after the other, and we make the assumption, oh, it must have happened, the next day or so. Matthew gives us the rest of the information. He fills in the blank and makes it clear that there was actually a significant piece of time. So you have to use both passages and start to lay out the timelines and when things would have happened. And then you start to see that by the time they came, and then you see how Matthew says, oh, they entered the house. They weren't in a stable anymore. And they used the word for child, not infant. Oh, this was an older child now, not a baby in arms any longer necessarily. So it's only by putting all of that together. But from the very early days, they just, we just sort of told that whole story as if it was one long event that happened in a week.
And that's how all the nativity sets are made.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to change that.
Yep, yeah. I know a lot of churches will keep the kings back, not on the set, and bring them out today on the 6th of January. Then the kings show up. But again, it wasn't only 12 days later either. It was quite a bit longer than that.
Right.
Anybody have thoughts or requests for where we go with the next study?
I started an email, then I didn't send it. I don't know if it's a topic for Bible study. A couple of weeks ago, I think Mary came up, and I thought of this before this, about how she's so much more prominently featured in the Catholic Church.
Right.
Than she is in the Episcopal Church.
Yes.
So I was thinking, I don't know if that would be a good subject for Bible study. Is Mary, as she's seen in the Episcopal Church? Because we don't even say a Hail Mary to her.
No.
The Catholic Church, you say a Hail Mary and all that stuff, and that was something I thought of.
Well, I'm happy to address that, and I'll try to do that next week. We can talk more about that. I think that's a good topic just to explore a little bit, because I think that's a question probably lots of people have too. We can talk about that.
I wonder that frequently.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do that. Does anybody have interest in learning about the Anglican Rosary?
Sure, I do.
Yes, I do.
I didn't know there was such a thing.
There is. There is.
Yeah.
Oh, all right, so maybe before we start another book of the Bible or something of that type, we'll address these two things. We'll address Mary, and we'll look at the Rosary, both the Catholic Rosary and the Anglican version of the Rosary. Yep, you can buy Anglican Rosaries. It's actually becoming much more common today than some years ago. It seems to be becoming much more popular among Anglicans to use the Rosary as an aid for prayer. So I'll go into that too. I'll bring one. I'll show you where you can get them or you can make them if you're interested in that, and we'll dive into those, and we'll start next week. Might take us more than one day, but we'll do that next. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, that sounds great. That sounds really good.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks. Those are good ideas.
Father Ron, are you wearing Christmas clothes?
I am.
I figured.
I have a new shirt.
Looks pretty nice.
Thank you. Yeah, got it while we were out west. We were in a little store. I said, that looks good.
Yeah, it looks nice.
Thanks. All right. Take care, everybody.
All right, you too.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
God bless.
Bye.